Test one, two. Test one, two. Test, test. One, two, 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 two. One, two. One, two. One mic for like the moderator. Just put on it. The handout.
Is it on right now?
Everything's on now.
Okay, great. So this can be passed around so you can get sound. Okay, great.
We're going to be streaming large parts of this, but there may be a couple of points where we decide to turn the camera off if we want to have some candid conversations in a Chatham House rule kind of environment. But for the most part, you should figure that what you're saying is on the record and what you're listening to is on the record. Yep. Oh, yeah. Chris is our able videographer, so he's part of the team here.
Actually, I'm only going to be talking for a little bit. I'll just use
Yeah, okay. Just use this.
It's in a big container. Okay, so my name's Joellen Green Kaiser. I am based in San Francisco, so I've had a long flight. And I'm the board chair of ITEGA, which is the Information Trust Exchange Governing Association. And on behalf of ITEGA, I want to welcome you all here today. I want to thank you especially for coming for what I think is going to be one of the most important events, I'm hoping, of the decade in terms of finding new ways to create revenue and trust for publishers. I want to thank especially our hosts for today. We have three hosts. The Local Media Consortium, and Fran Wills will talk to in a minute, who's really organized this event and gotten us going, and is representing over 2,200 news organizations, news outlets, and is really looking for, has really been innovative in their search for solutions. I want to also thank the Internet Society, which help us convene these multi-stakeholder meetings. And I'm so sorry that Larry Strickling was unable to be with us and left. He had to drop out just a few weeks ago, and so we weren't able to get another person here from the Internet Society, but they are definitely one of our co-hosts and have been very supportive of our efforts. And I also want to thank Justin Hendricks from the New York City Media Lab, who's given us this space. You're going to hear so much more about ITEGA that I don't feel like I need to say more about it, except that our mission is to provide Internet stakeholders a forum to convene, develop, and implement governing protocols and business rules for protecting and balancing trust, privacy, and identity. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fran from Local Media Consortium.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Okay. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Fran Wills, the CEO of the Local Media Consortium. We are an organization that represents about 80 local media companies, as Joellen said, that service 2,200 media outlets, and it includes newspaper, TV, radio, and online-only publishers. And we are very interested in what ITEGA is doing in bringing together a lot of different stakeholders in the discussion around consumer privacy and data collection, and how that can be coexist, I guess, with advertising models. So we're very excited that we have such a diverse group of folks here, and please feel free to speak up and provide us your point of view, because we think it's very important that we get that we hear a lot of viewpoints today, and need all of your input to make sure we are crafting something that's going to be acceptable to consumers, acceptable to brands and advertisers, and acceptable to publishers. So that's our goal, is to create a consumer privacy practice that supports those three constituents. So with that, I will turn it over. Am I turning it over to you, Bill, or Michelle? To Justin. Oh, there you go.
So thank you very much, and thank you, Joellen. For anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Justin Hendricks. I run a thing called NYC Media Lab, which is a consortium of media communications companies here in New York City that's run out of NYU School of Engineering. And we look at emerging media technology. We look at a range of issues in media. We run a program that we call Technology, Media, and Democracy, which is a graduate course that takes place at NYU, Columbia, CUNY, the New School, and Cornell Tech. And it looks at a range of the types of problems and questions that you're posing today. And we've done our best to try to create a space for these types of discussions whenever we can, including addressing some of these things in context of other events that we host. I see Aviv over there, who's part of our Machines Plus Media conference that we hosted at Bloomberg earlier this year that looked at a lot of the opportunity and how certainly the data sciences, machine learning, AI are changing media, but also some of the dark side and the questions and problems and serious issues that we've got to all discuss together. And basically, I just want you to feel at home here at NYU at the Tandon School of Engineering. This floor typically is full of graduate students, master's students who are learning to make things. They're learning to make film and video, but also virtual and augmented reality. They're making physical manifestations of media. There is a big project here that focuses on using media to help people with various disabilities. There is a program here that focuses on education and technology. There's just a whole lot going on this floor. It's a little quiet right now because we're about 10 days out from the start. Hello, David Carroll. We're a little far out from the start of the semester. So please, I just tell you to, unless you see a class that's happening or you see a room that's occupied, as you go through the next day and a half, make yourself at home here, spread out, eat whatever's in the fridge. If it doesn't have a student's name on it, there's vending machines, etc. The restrooms, if you didn't see them, I feel like I'm obliged to say this, are behind the kitchen area. So if you're looking for them and you're confused, they're sort of around there. I believe Wi-Fi details have been sent to you. So if you have any trouble with the Wi-Fi, let us know. We always like to make sure that you're well connected while you're here. And if there's anything that we can do, my colleague Alexis is going to be in and out for the day and a half. I will be in and out for the day and a half. We're also standing up a new sort of operation down in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as well, so I'll be down there some. But I'm just so grateful you're here and the issues you're addressing, super important. And Joellen, I know, has been on this topic for good part of your career, and I'm grateful to so many people that I recognize in the room who I know are doing important things to think about how we capitalize the search for facts in this century. So thank you so much for being here.
We really do value your time and perspective here. This isn't just a random group of people. Hey, Joe. We invited people that we knew had the expertise and the insight and also the creativity to tackle some of this so that we can create a data ecosystem that works for people and supports quality journalism and works for advertisers too. So there are many pieces to this puzzle. The users who feel powerless, right? And we all know what that feels like because we've all been a part of the system. It sucks to feel like you can't do very much to protect your privacy, even if you have nothing to hide. To the journalists who have struggled to monetize their content and have resorted to devaluing it through ad tech and violating their user privacy in the process. Not ideal for anybody. to the advertisers who want more for their money, want insight into how they're spending their money, and don't want to send ads to bots, right? To the technologists who know that there are solutions out there that just need to be tied together, and connecting the technologists is one of the goals here so that we can come up with a solution that makes sense and that works with existing tech. And finally, to the advocates who hate companies and internet and I'm kidding, just kidding. Advocates don't hate the internet or advertising or companies. In fact, I think what advocates hate is the privacy theater that occurs when companies say they care about privacy, but then continue to do most of the things that we don't like. So all of these things, hopefully, are going to be the rubber on the road today. And what we want to do is set up a system where we have ITEGA as the third party. This is crucial, right? It's a nonprofit entity that will create a governance framework around this data ecosystem. And the data ecosystem is going to go around the Local Media Consortium, which is 800 members, 2,200 digital properties. So not a huge amount, but enough. And this is all local news, which if you read about the declining trust in national media, it actually is up for local news. People trust their local news. There's a lot of value there. And for people who are coming in and who want to not sign into 1 million pages, they don't want to read a bunch of privacy policies like any of us. They want to sign in one secure place where they know they can read content that they're interested in, right? And the advertisers who can ping this data, not collect it, not collect liability on top of it, that know that they're compliant with existing and coming law, but that get real people, verifiable real people, and who maybe are some of the untouchables, as Augustine mentioned today. And they derive value from the system too. And all of this is to push up journalists to make their content valuable to them. So the objectives for our discussion today, because I've been in a lot of these meetings and I kind of hate it when there's a lot of rambling and people have good ideas and they kind of want to share what they know, and that's fine. We're going to do that. But what I want you to understand in the background is these are the objectives that everybody who's working on this is going to be thinking about. So the first is to kind of map out the problems and specifically figure out from different perspectives, what are the problems, what are the challenges in this ecosystem? The second is to determine how the problems overlap. So advertisers, users, brands, publishers, where do those problems overlap and how do we solve them? Through tech, through policy, right? How do we make sure that we're creating a system, as Fran said, that works for everybody? And so tomorrow, after we have this discussion, we're going to narrow down, we're going to drill down to choose the policies and practices that people can live with, let's say. And then to figure out the technological approaches, we had a small group discussion this morning that I thought was fantastic, that really helped kind of create a preliminary, let's say, blueprint for how the tech can make this work, this vision that we have. And then we'll also determine small issue groups. So you're going to be really excited about this project by the end of this. Believe me, you're going to be advocates too. And so what we want to do is take that and put you into small groups that aren't tasked with a lot of stuff, but just using the knowledge that you already have to make some recommendations going forward. And we might ask you to do that after this meeting. In fact, we will ask you to do that after this meeting, to give us your insight, to make this a truly multi-stakeholder project. And I can tell you right now that I'm determined to make this happen for Local Media Consortium. So we're going to push this forward. And we have the players and the resources and all the dynamics that we need. We just need your insight now. So before I do that, and this is totally modeling after Larry, to come up with ground rules for the meeting. So, you know, it's one at a time. I guess I should write these down, huh? All right. I'm going to use green. So, ground rules. So one person speaks at a time. If you want to speak, how do you want to make that known? Raise your hand, flip a card, raise hand. I really do want your input. Does that work? Okay. Raise, oh gosh. I feel like my handwriting's so terrible now that I type everything all the time. And do not use sexist, racist, or inflammatory language. No dominating or threatening behavior. This is so that you're not talking over people, which I can be guilty of doing. So just make sure that's not occurring. Make sure that everybody is contributing to this conversation. We want to hear everybody. Nobody gets to sit in the background. Yeah, thank you. And finally, and another one is just try to stay on topic. Now, I also have the ability to go veer way off topic. So we're going to have a parking lot over there, I guess, for ideas that are relevant and we want to talk about, but not right now. And then finally, Chatham House Rule. Joe, tell us what Chatham House Rule is. So we can discuss what everybody said, what this conversation's about, but do not attribute it to a person or an entity or anybody. So a little bit about my background before we get started. I started off in the 90s tech boom, doing software engineering, and then I went into monetizing. So I went into American Express, had some website properties that I worked on monetizing. And then I started working with universities and nonprofits and got really into the public interest part of this work. And eventually I landed at CDT, and Joe used to work for me, which is why I was calling on him. But I won't do that. Sorry. Attribute anything foolish to Joe Jerome from CDT. And so what we have here are some ground rules. We have the parking lot, and we have a collection of really smart, really interesting people. So let's get started. And we're going to start our first session as a panel. And it's just a way to kind of hear from those perspectives that I mentioned, lay out some of the problems, map out some of the problems. All right? So can our panelists please come up here? We have Chris Hendricks, who may not be here yet. Not here yet, okay. No, I saw him actually before I left. He was delayed at LaGuardia. Enough said. Justin Berkman, Augustin. Am I saying that right? Augustin, I'm sorry. Oh, here. Oh, I'll put it up there. Yeah. Got it, thanks. I have a lot of hair, sorry. And, okay, so we got everybody except Chris, who will be here soon. So I'm going to very, very briefly introduce these people who are very accomplished. Okay. So their bios are long. So take the time later if you have a chance to look into it. We'll start with Don. Don Marty is an open source technologist at Mozilla, open source. He is the former editor of the Linux Journal and former president of the Silicon Valley Linux Users Group. He's the founder of the Aluda project, the first publisher and brand-centric tool for incentivizing end-user tracking protection. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay. Dr. Fu is an industry-recognized thought leader in digital strategy and integrated marketing. He most recently served as Senior Vice President of Digital Lead of MRM Worldwide, a McCann World Group company, and he teaches digital and integrated marketing at Rutgers University and NYU. Thanks for being here. And Mr. Justin Brookman also used to be my boss, so now you have this whole dynamic here. Justin is the Director of Consumer Privacy and Technology Policy for Consumers Union, the policy and advocacy arm of Consumer Reports. Prior to Consumers Union, he served as Policy Director of the Federal Trade Commission's Office of Technology Research and Investigation. He was also Director of the Consumer Privacy Project for the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is where I was privileged to be under his tutelage. And before that, he was an Assistant Attorney General at, and later the Chief of the Internet Bureau in the New York Attorney General's office. So thanks all for being here. When Chris gets here, we will talk more about him. So, so this panel, as you guys know, was to bring up and kind of create a map for people in the audience, if possible, some of the problems and challenges that we're facing in envisioning and building and implementing this idea of a new data advertising ecosystem for publishers. So I was going to start with Chris, but I think that you all have, maybe Dr. Fu, you can take this one. Why are local news outlets struggling to survive online? You know, what are the key problem areas here?
So local news outlets are struggling right now just like most other publishers, right? So if we imagine the last 20 years of the internet, right, we started out with big publishers that wrote good content offline, like print publishers, they started bringing that content online and putting it on their websites, and they monetized it via ads. So that was kind of the start of the end, right? But if you think about the last 20 years, most of the internet has been ad-supported. So the master we're serving are the advertisers, right? And all the ad tech companies have also grown up to serve the advertisers. And so kind of cutting right to the privacy issue, if you're serving the advertiser and the consumer is the product, right? The user and all their information is the product because the advertisers want to target them. And they believe that with more targeting, they would get better outcomes from their marketing. The funds are going to go from the publishers to now all these ad tech companies that promise the world to the marketers. And the other thing that's happening, and especially in the last couple of years when we talk about ad tech, there's this concept of the long tail where advertisers now believe they can reach any person at any time with any ad on any website. Right, so they no longer need to place ads on large websites where humans actually go. They think they can actually show ads because ad tech told them they could. To show ads to people, no matter what site they showed up, even long-tail crappy sites, right? So because of that belief, the funds are clearly flowing away from good publishers to all these crappy sites that are now aggregated by the millions so that there's scale. And, oh, by the way, the CPMs are cheaper. So when you have another party in the supply chain called the media buying agencies, they love to buy cheap stuff. Because the way they look good to their client is, oh, we bought you more stuff at lower cost, right? And, oh, by the way, some of them keep some of that for themselves as well. But nonetheless, for the marketers, that's why the flow of dollars has been away from the good publishers. And so we've ultimately devalued journalism to the point where it's struggling to survive. But there's a lot of other points.
Very well put. Thank you. Succinctly and well put. So, Justin, what is the role of privacy in all of this? Why does it matter? And can it actually, is something I've said for a long time, that privacy can drive innovation. Tell me, is that true or not?
Yeah, so I mean, I think all consumers have always complained about ad tech and always felt uncomfortable with it. And we were in D.C. We always hear libertarian groups saying they'll get used to it any moment now. But we keep seeing it doesn't. It doesn't, right? It actually gets worse because the tracking is becoming more invasive, right? So the consumer experience is actually pretty terrible. For 9 out of 10 web browsers I use, I have locked down with ad blockers, but I have one just to see what it's like, to see how the other half live, and it's ridiculous, right? I mean, it takes forever to load. Things kind of keep popping up at you everywhere. Retargeting is ubiquitous. It's increasingly cross-device retargeting. Over the weekend, I can't remember if I did it on the laptop or on my phone. I looked up CVS Minute Clinic because I got strep throat like a 12-year-old. And I went there, but then my wife started getting Twitter ads for Minute Clinic on her phone, right? Which is, I mean, and again, that's fairly harmless, but around Christmas it tends to ruin Christmas for a lot of people, and so people I think just rebel against it. Especially on mobile location information is incredibly sensitive. People, I appreciate everyone's very visceral reaction to the motherboard story about cell carriers selling location information, but on mobile apps and the mobile ad ecosystem, I mean, the location information is shared promiscuously with very little accountability or controls. I think ultimately folks are worried about price discrimination. We haven't seen a whole lot of it yet, but it's down the road. I think folks are very concerned that they're going to lose out. They're going to not get the benefit of the bargain. And then ultimately, just kind of just leave me alone, right? Just kind of let me have my own experience. I think ultimately, at some point we need to end the war of all against all, right? I mean, consumers shouldn't have to be in this defensive, crouching posture all the time. I shouldn't have to install multiple ad blockers or delete cookies or do all these things. And I think at some point we need to go back to where we can feel comfortable and trusting and feel that it's not an adversarial relationship with the sites we're going to, but that's not the case right now.
Yeah, I think was it you who said it's not users versus companies, right? This morning.
Yes, there's kind of a simplified view in privacy nerd circles that it's all the users on one side and all the companies on the other. And there are really a lot of companies that have interests that are strongly aligned with the privacy interests of the users. And of course, trustworthy local news sites, the kind of sites with which users are willing to share their information, are very closely aligned to users' interests and preferences on sharing their information.
Right. So what's the solution?
I think we, from the browser point of view, the solution is always research-driven and data-driven. So from the Mozilla point of view, people have been doing research on users' norms and choices on engaging with the web for a long time. And some of those studies are open-ended, qualitative studies where we'll really sit people down at a table and talk to them about their attitudes toward having different kinds of information shared for different purposes. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are massive studies, what we call internally at Mozilla a shield study, where test code can be deployed to random users to see how a particular privacy change will affect people's engagement with the web. So,
can you share any of your findings? Or
we have some published data. One really interesting paper that just came out that was a peer-reviewed paper showed that ad blocker users were spending 28% more time on the web, which we think is because they feel like they're having a more trustworthy experience.
Yeah, interesting.
And from what we can tell about other companies' research, I think a lot of people are seeing the same thing. So Apple, of course, their brand aesthetic is everything comes down from California on high, but really they do a lot of user research. Occasionally you see things like discovery in a lawsuit showed that Apple does more user research on Samsung's users than Samsung does. And so when Apple Safari took some really industry-leading measures to protect their users from cross-site tracking, that shows that everyone's user research is roughly going in the same direction. Browsers are trying to get better engagement from users, which means giving those users protection for their data that matches up with their norms and preferences.
Great, and we'll dig into that more later. Dr. Fu, maybe tell us, what are the major concerns related to privacy and ad fraud from a brand perspective, from a marketing perspective?
Sadly, the answer is not much.
Meaning, so they don't mind that we're talking billions of dollars of fraud.
We
is that
are,
just acceptable waste?
And the current thought is that it's someone else's problem. Right, so we had a discussion over lunch. Even the big marketers, they're fully aware of the concept of ad fraud, and they might have even seen the big numbers. But no matter how big the numbers, right, we said in 2016 it was $9 billion. In 2017 it's $11 billion. And in 2018 it's $19 billion.
How can they just look away from that?
Because they don't think it's happening to them. And the other thing is there's plenty of reports and fraud detection technology companies that keep telling them everything's fine. And industry trade bodies that also say, oh, well, we solved it already. And, you know, there's one in Australia that thinks ad fraud in mobile is 0%, so nothing to worry about. So there's a difference between the fraud not being there and you not being able to detect it with technology. So for the time being, there's only a handful of marketers that truly care. And I would say, I'd characterize that the brand marketers are more at risk because they tend to spend their dollars for branding purposes, so they're still asking for reach and frequency. So in those cases, they've kind of taken the TV mentality into digital. But unlike in the physical world where there's a finite number of TV shows and therefore a finite number of TV ads, and also print goes the same, right? There's a finite number of pages you can buy. In digital, there's no constraints of the physical world, right? You can make up unlimited web pages, unlimited ad impressions, unlimited users. and that's what the bad guys have done, right? So when we're trying to buy more and more stuff in digital, that's where we're seeing, these numbers that just don't add up, right? For years, Nielsen has kept reporting that people watch more and more linear TV. They also use their mobile device a lot more. They also watch videos online more, to the point where there's just not enough waking hours to account for all that.
Right.
So the point is,
We're
in
human
digital,
beings.
a lot of it can be made up.
Yeah.
Right? So for the marketers, some have caught on, but most of them still think that they can improve their outcomes by just buying more ads.
Gotcha.
And a lot of the people in the supply chain are more than happy to sell them that, because they make more money the greater the flow is through the system.
So it's like a giant.
Cleared it all up?
No, I don't think so. I'm glad you saw it.
Okay, so Justin, maybe just briefly, how are laws like the GDPR or the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, how do these play in this space in terms of what's happening now and also building a solution to the problem?
Yeah, so GDPR is unclear with regard to everything, right? I mean,
Yes,
they passed GDPR partly saying we're punting on a lot of the ad tech issues, which we're going to address in the e-privacy directive, which is coming down the road theoretically in a year or so, but who really knows?
Right.
GDPR, people call it like a consent-based model, but it's really not, right? They still have the same legitimate interest exception, which could be used to justify advertising, all sorts of things. And also, Europe has this proud tradition of passing privacy laws and then not bothering to enforce them. GDPR gives them a lot more of a hammer to attack people. Until we actually see meaningful enforcement, I'm not holding my breath on GDPR.
Okay.
Day one, I feel like Google and Facebook were clearly in violation of explicit. Like GDPR is fuzzy, but there's things that are explicit in it. I think they were ignoring it, and we'll see if any DPA has the courage to stand up to them. So everything and nothing is illegal under GDPR until we see what the enforcers do. Okay. The California privacy law, right? So it provides for a mandatory opt-out. It's kind of do not track what's supposed to be. There is a way to turn off the advertising. It's not clear in practice exactly what it means for a lot of ad tech stuff. It's meant to address a lot of it. It was written fairly quickly, and the California Attorney General is in the process of enacting clarifying regulations on that, but they're not sure what to do. So I think in theory, it should shut off you should have an option to shut off most operative tracking. Though again, for something like the consortium is envisioning, there's always an opportunity to opt back into things if a compelling use case is made.
Okay.
And then there's existing law, right? We're seeing enforcers start to be a little bit more aggressive on location stuff, right? The LA city attorney filed a suit on the Weather Channel sharing geolocation information, which is something that like 80 zillion apps do. FTC has been a little bit more aggressive on Section 5, could argue that location sensitive, could argue for a more expansive view into a lot of stuff. The FTC is under a lot of pressure, being criticized by folks, Democrats and Republicans, for not being strong enough with their admittedly somewhat flimsy authority.
Yeah.
So we could see more effort on that too.
Okay. And we have a drafter of the California law here, so we may have to hear from him at some point.
I would like to. I'd like to hear. I've talked to like 30 folks. It's like, what do you think CCPA means for ad tech? And I get a wildly different answer from most of them. So I think it's it's changing too, right? I mean, like the sponsors have said, there were some minor technical amendments that were passed in the summer of last year. But they said, like, in 2019, we're going to do more substantive stuff. We don't want to lose the gist of it, again, which I think is designed to get to ad tech.
Yeah.
But we need to make things more clear. But things like, social sharing widgets, analytics pixels, what do those exactly mean? What can or should you opt out of those?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah. So it has to be a policy and technology solution. And you identified a couple, I think, areas that make a lot of sense. And if you want to write them down, you can too. But the compatibility metrics and incentivization are kind of the categories, right? There you go. And maybe walk us through.
screen.
Oh, it's not a whiteboard. I thought it was too. Here, I'll move. Bless you.
So what those three bullet points are really about is how can publishers productively engage with privacy technology. And of course, step one is compatibility. Just make sure that your site doesn't break when a user is coming in with the most popular privacy protection tools turned on. And this is just something to test when you're developing your site. And there's some good articles on the Mozilla Developer Network on how to do things like safely wrapping your third-party analytics so that you won't break navigation on your site if a user chooses not to have that navigation tracked by a third party, for example.
Okay.
Another key item is metrics. One of the important measures of humanness of a reputable website's audience is how well protected are those users from third-party tracking. Mm-hmm. And of course, depending on what user segment your site is addressing, you're going to get different measures of tracking protection. On sites that are built by and for web developers, you get 30 to 40% of users who are not susceptible to third-party tracking. On general interest sites, you're going to see different numbers, of course, depending on browser market share or popularity of various tools. Okay. So this is something that by understanding how well protected your audience is, you can make the case for using your site as a venue for reaching this human audience rather than some advertiser going off and trying to buy valuable eyeballs on a cheap site. Okay. And then finally, there's incentivization. So if you have an audience that's not as well protected from third-party tracking, as in these people are capable of being followed off to another site and their eyeballs sold there, then how do you get your audience better protected so that you can continue to capture an increasing amount of the advertising value of your site? And so this is an example of where if you detect someone is running an ad blocker, instead of just saying, turn off your ad blocker, you can say, you might be running an ad blocker thinking it's a privacy tool, but a lot of the commonly used ad blockers have a loophole. In order to get out of this paid whitelisting program, we recommend that you use this legit privacy tool instead. Okay. Other things you can do are offering additional articles through a paywall for users who are not reachable on other sites. Just increasing the defense level that the publisher applies to the user data that people choose to trust them with.
Great. Thank you. I find that really helpful as a frame for sort of the core areas that we're trying to pick apart here. So Dr. Frutelis, I get the sense that incentivization is going to be one of the hardest components of this. Tell us what you think. How do we get people to do this? I mean, Don had some good ideas. What do you think about whether or not users are going to go for this?
Yeah, I think that's really the biggest challenge. It's one of user adoption, because if the users don't currently value their privacy, why would they want something that gives them more privacy? So it ranges from, when I talk to millennials, a lot of them say, oh, I have nothing to hide, so I don't care if the government's spying on everything that I do, right? To other people who do care, but they're currently, they'd rather have the free service like Gmail rather than pay for something, right? Because right now they don't know it. They're not paying with dollars, but they're paying with their privacy, right? Because all those ad tech companies are set up to buy and sell their data with or without consent. So I think the users, there needs to be an educational curve to educate the users. But even then, that won't be a complete solution because some people will be still okay with it because they still rather have their free services. So I think the only way to think about it is the way Doc Searles has talked about it. You've heard of customer commons, right? So it's really turning over the control to the user. So the simple analogy is instead of the user visiting 100 different websites and agreeing to 100 different privacy policies, none of which they understand, if the user has a privacy policy and says, here's my privacy policy, which one of you publishers will respect it? Right? If you respect it, then I'll do business with you. And doing business with them simply means viewing a web page, right? Could be something as simple as that, or something more heavy lifting like actual transaction. So if we flip that around and we put the user at the heart, and if the stuff that we develop is from the user outward with a kind of privacy by design, then we're serving the user, and advertisers are no longer our master. Right? So it's really, you have to think about the internet differently. Because if we continue with the ad-supported internet as we have for the last 25 years, and we're still serving the advertiser as the master, it's not going to work.
There's a lot of structural advantage given to advertisers and ad fraud even, right, in the way that the internet functions. How do we overcome that? I mean, is it just the combination of a browser, some kind of federated login, the user data exchange, or something else?
Well, if you were going to design an advertising medium and try to make it fraud-friendly, you'd come up with something pretty close to what we have now.
Right.
The structural incentives for engaging in fraud are so big that the rules of the game really have to change.
Right.
And so browsers are making fixes in how information gets shuffled from one site to another in order to deliver on their own values and to increase user engagement with that browser. And a side effect of fixing the browser to enable better privacy is changing the rules of the data game, which will affect how the fraud incentives work.
Okay.
So I'm actually fairly optimistic because in most ad media, we don't see the enormous amount of fraud that's present in web and mobile advertising. Print advertising doesn't have a significant fraud problem. Broadcast doesn't have a significant fraud problem. Bus benches. Have you ever seen somebody get billed for a fake bus bench? That's not a thing. So we should be able to get this fixed.
Okay. I'm going to ask Justin one more question, and then we'll open it up for your questions. What are if you had to narrow it down to some core practices, maybe policies, that are anti-privacy or are making this worse, and I'm talking mostly about the local media consortiums, publishers, things that they have on their site, they have widgets, they have all this kind of stuff. What do those look like? What are the core things that would have to change?
I mean, they don't necessarily have to change, just need buy-in for them, right? I mean, if you're saying that you need targeted ads to monetize this, then you need to make the compelling use case. And that's kind of goes back to the incentives piece. And you asked about the law before. I mean, the law may actually prohibit incentives in some cases, right? GDPR arguably says you can't change the experience for someone who makes a privacy choice. CCPA originally said that, and then it was revised to say you can't do it unless it's related to the value, and it's actually really confusing what it means. And so it'll be interesting.
Can you tell us what it means? this is Ashkan Sotani, former CTO of the Federal Trade Commission and a drafter of the California bill.
Co-drafter. Justin.
Yeah, no pressure.
So Justin's right. The original ballot initiative said that you could not essentially deny people access to your website or content, your service basically, if they opted to enact their privacy choice. The legislative bill, the AB 375, essentially said you can charge them, if for people that are opted out, you can charge them to access your site or service, but that charge has to be commensurate with the value of that data to the business. There was a typo that didn't say to the business, so there was some confusion.
Oh, so to the consumer.
But essentially, what it requires is that the business articulate the per-user value of a piece of information or kind of that opt-in choice to that business. And why that's important is, from a policy perspective, it's been I've been in a number of discussions where policymakers have a hard time trying to evaluate what the value of free service is in both kind of privacy and competition cases. And so I think this would start trying to kind of have more transparency on what that value add is. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but the business is always allowed to monetize that data on a first-party basis. The California law allows consumers to opt out of the sale or sharing of that personal information to third parties if they opt out.
Okay, great. So if we build this correctly, it will be compliant, hopefully, with California. Well, the reason I bring that up is because that's a huge efficiency for local publishers who may not need to then hire compliance officers or others. So I apologize to the attorneys who may lose business over that. So let's open it up to questions. Does anyone have a question for the panelists here? And we will go, after this, we're going to go around and introduce ourselves, et cetera. So, but please go ahead.
I'm Gary Deutsch. You're bringing up issues of fraud and privacy in the same sort of discussion. I mean, are they the same thing? I mean, I don't think they are. But, I mean, I don't know that necessarily the consumer who's a privacy-oriented mindset is caring about fraud. That's the publisher problem. So how do those things come together when you think about privacy?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, the underlying problem is data leakage, and fraud and privacy issues are two symptoms of data leakage.
Yeah, I mean, data leakage and the programmatic and the dizzying complexity of the ad tech ecosystem enables both. So if you start burning off some heads of the Hydra, then I think, regardless of why you're trying to do it, you'll address both problems.
Yeah, the fraud doesn't affect the consumer, but when an advertiser is using ad tech to try to target a user, the bad guys are literally pretending to be those humans. Right? So the bots can visit a whole number of websites to then look like an auto intender or look like a back-to-school intender, right? And with ad tech, and you all probably have this experience, you look at a product on Amazon, and the next minute, that exact product shows up in a banner ad somewhere else, right? So that's the retargeting part, and because Amazon's selling that data, bots know how to trigger those things, right? So they would deliberately go look at a backpack during back to school. So then all of these backpack sellers will think, oh, well, here's a huge, giant audience of all these people who looked at backpacks, so they must be intending to buy a backpack. So then they retarget them. So that's where the fraud comes in, right, where the bots can mimic the human behavior. You're right, it doesn't affect the consumer, but the advertisers think they're buying an audience that's not human, basically.
And, of course, old school ad fraud used to be less impact on the user because it used to be bots in data centers talking to ad tech machines in data centers. Now, because the ad tech industry is better at filtering out data center traffic, a lot of those bots are now actual malware that does run on end user devices.
Right. Joe. Go ahead.
This is just a quick, early, cynical question. I'm just curious whether you guys have thoughts on whether and how it might be possible to work with the existing sort of self-regulatory advertising trade associations, since it seems like some of you are being pretty dismissive of their current work.
And Brendan might too.
Yeah, they're going to be fiercely protective of their model, right? I mean, like we encountered this with Do Not Track, which was like, again, a browser-based solution to try to kind of get some of the ideas that we're talking about. Give the user some agency over their device, and set the rules of the road, and try to wrest some semblance of rulemaking away from them. And they came down hard and put all their resources to stop that. I mean, some of it was ad tech, not wanting to lose the revenue, but it's also like entrenched interests, whose summer homes or third summer homes are funded by membership fees, who put all their resources into stopping it. And so I think that's absolutely going. I appreciate all these efforts to try new different things. I mean, we're Consumer Reports. We're doubling down on the subscription model, and some organizations have been successful with that. I'm interested in what Brave is trying to do. I think there's value to I think Don's right. Like whatever it is, it's not this. So I appreciate lots of interesting iterative efforts to try to find something else.
And after Don, maybe Brendan used to work at the IAB Labs, so he might have some perspective on that.
And I strongly believe in working with the existing ad tech companies. I sent the IAB a pull request on transparency and consent framework. So there's a lot of opportunity for technology and skills and business relationships that have been developed in the old system to make the move over. I used to be the editor of Linux Journal, and in the early days of Linux, of course, there were a lot of Unix people who were saying, this Linux thing isn't going anywhere. And then 5 years later, all those same people's business card had Linux on it somewhere. So it's not a impenetrable gap.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And Brendan, maybe tell us briefly.
On the the DAA, the Digital Advertising Alliance, maintains a relationship to allow opt-out with third-party ad systems. That's the crux of what they do, is maintaining that relationship. So if that is something that can be leveraged, they might be an interesting partner. If that is something that technology evolves to just completely obsolete, then they run the risk of becoming obsolete unless they iterate. I think that's fundamentally, their relationship is, how do you have a direct relationship from the client web browser to the third-party ad system and have some additional information in that? And that might be outdated.
Can I ask you, Chris, to join us up here briefly? Sorry. I have a question about how local publishers.
One response was that while it doesn't, ad fraud and privacy don't affect, or ad fraud specifically doesn't affect consumers directly, indirectly it does, because it creates an ecosystem where pricing is diminished and value is not given to the publishers who create the content that they are coming to read. So.
Fair enough. That's right. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Hendricks. I'm the president of the Local Media Consortium. Sorry I'm late, but it was normally less than an hour or so flight. Took 6 hours today.
Oh, man. So sorry.
Yeah.
We were in the question portion, but since you're here, let me just ask you and have the mic. What drove this project for you guys? Was it hearing from your local publishers, just the general understanding that local publishers and media in general are struggling to monetize?
First, I'll tell you the truth. Is that
that'd be great.
Bill Dunsmore crawled up my
Bill Dunsmore.
No, he begged me. No,
the
I'm just kidding. Actually, Bill did contact me, and we have been talking about it. This was something of the thought leadership side of the Local Media Consortium, not necessarily something that our members were looking at, because they're scrambling for what dollars are on the table. But we saw what was going on with the CCPA, and we said, there's got to be a way to get in front of this and use all this movement where the pendulum had swung too far in favor of the advertising community, as it swings back, to get ahead of it. And fundamentally believing that the platforms who have abused that privilege, they have to back the train up. And in that moment, we might be able to get ahead of them, but that would require us not just to create a publisher-friendly privacy policy, but one that was driven to the benefit of the consumer first, the reader first, and then if we could use that to our advantage, we may be able to change the ecosystem. Now, we realized we couldn't do it on our own, and that's where Bill came in just at the right moment and said, hey, we're having this convening, and we'd like you to be part of it, and that's where a lot of people caught up with it. So this really was a move to say, we know that we've been wronged in the system, we know that the consumer has been wronged in the system, and this is an attempt to right that wrong.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Any questions from the audience before we wrap this up? Yes, yes. Would you mind?
So with all the different people and the different perspectives in the room, is there any sort of common consensus that you feel for what is the line where privacy gets icky? Like, is it generally perceived that all retargeting is bad? Is it okay if it, the site knows that I like travel, so I get travel ads versus sports ads? I mean, what is the dividing line between ick and non-ick?
Mm-hmm. That's what we should have called this meeting, the dividing line.
Well, the answer to that from a lot of the user research is that there are really several different kinds of people out there. And there's a subset of the user population that's about 31% or one-third of users who are very comfortable with having advertising customized to them. And then there's another segment, which is about half or a slight majority of users who get extremely squicked out by seeing activity in one context, like a work context, follow them over into another browsing context, like a site that they're visiting for personal reasons. And then there are other people who are kind of in the middle. So it's really not so much about figuring out what is the one master dividing line between that which is creepy for all time and must be forbidden and that which is A-okay for all time. But it's really about doing that research, understanding the user, where possible, having the browser interpret the user's actions to protect that user and treat them the way that they want to be treated and that they want their information to be treated.
Mm-hmm. And giving them some options.
Yeah, and I think if we just turn it around and give the control back to the user, then we won't have to find that line. Because to every user, their privacy preferences are different, right? So think about the millennial that posts their nude selfies on Instagram because they want to, right? They might change their mind in the future and say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. As long as they don't have the ability to retract that or change their mind later, then they don't have the control. So if we can use technology to give that control back to the user, right, that's how we solve a lot of the privacy issues.
But if you want to talk about tiny minorities of users who actually manually flip settings like that is a very tiny minority.
Yeah, and so any way that these controls look, it's going to be by default first the protection.
Yeah, it's really on the software to come up with an intelligent and appropriate set of protections that works for the user who's using it.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into some of those.
Context to it also. I mean, as an extreme example would be porn. That's contextual. If you're visiting a porn site, you don't want that traveling with you or seeing retargeting on it, right? So, but contextually, if I'm on Nordstrom, I might not mind it, so I should have the ability to dampen that if I want. The good news here is that porn doesn't do that, but that's an extreme just to prove a point. You know, it's contextually. It just doesn't have to do with, okay, one moment I may be this persona, the next moment I may be this persona, and I want to have the ability to dial in where I want those privacy settings to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? I'm going to take a little time since we're going to go around the room now. But thank you all very much for a great conversation. Thank you. Appreciate it. Set us up well.
All right, so we've already met at least 5 people, 6 people, and we've met a couple of more who've voiced questions. But this is a chance for us all to get to know each other. And I think that because we're live streaming, we're going to keep our setup this way. But I really hate it personally when people are introducing and I have to like turn my head around sideways to see who they are. So I would like to invite you, if you're physically able, to stand up when you're introducing yourself. And if you're feeling like gesturing, you can. And if you're a shy person and want to stand there and introduce yourself, you can. And we're going to learn a little bit about you. We would like to know your name and what you're bringing here and what you'd like to leave here with. So, for example, I can model and start and say, my name is Joellen Green Kaiser. What I bring is a passion for independent media, media policy, and democracy. Because I'm currently a consultant for independent media, but I'm also a board chair of ITEGA. And I'm really hoping to leave here with some next steps for ITEGA that are going to be concrete. So that's an example of what I'd love you to do. And I'm going to just pass this mic around for the live streamers, so you'll be on live stream. And I'm hoping that you'll just do that, your name, what you bring here, and what you'd like to leave with. Brendan, do you want to model?
I'm Brendan with a long last name, Brendan Rudin Butterworth. I come here with a little bit of experience in ad technology, data collection, privacy and security issues. I hope to come out of here with some real understanding of a product that we can drive towards with ITEGA.
Hi, I'm Fran Wills, CEO of the Local Media Consortium. And what I bring here is a representation of a lot of media companies that would like help in solving this dilemma around consumer data advertising and a sustainable business model for journalism. And what I hope to get out of this is hopefully having all of you contribute to what the answer to that dilemma might be.
Hi, I'm Mark Bullard with Lee Enterprises. I'm one of the members of the LMC. Our company is about 50 U.S. markets. What I bring is a long experience in the newsroom and in the newspaper business. I currently work on the monetization side, so I'm one of the bad guys that takes the money from the advertisers and tries to make the most of what we have. I would ask you guys all to remember that, in my opinion, the things we produce are not free. And it's one thing that often gets forgotten, I think, is that that is one of the things that's driven this whole situation. Is there is a belief that things on the internet should be free, but there are a lot of man hours that go into producing content, and we're just trying to find some source of revenue to continue to drive that content. A lot of the things on our pages are results of some people wanting to do something cool. A lot of the things that are on our pages come from the newsrooms. They don't come from the advertising side. That's also something to think about. And coming out of this meeting, I'm hoping there's some sort of roadmap towards a product that can meet everyone's needs. Anyway, thank you.
Todd Eskelson with Eskelson Law Group of Kensington, Maryland. What I bring to the meeting is a long time, more than I like to think about, advising companies with legal problems, particularly cooperatives and membership organizations, including the Bluetooth SIG when they first started to get together, how it was they could cooperate with one another and develop what they've developed. What I'm hoping to get is a better understanding of not so much the technology, but the considerations that need to be thought of and discussed and addressed, so as to be able to get all the stakeholders to, so that I understand better what the stakeholders' ideas and requirements are, so as to be able to advise on the governance of the ITEGA.
Afternoon. Hi, I'm Kevin Bankston. I'm the director of the Open Technology Institute at New America in DC, and what I bring here, I guess, is dedication to my organization's mission to ensure that all communities have access to an internet that is both open and secure, including an advertising ecosystem that respects users' privacy and autonomy. And what I hope to leave with, I suppose, is new relationships with people who know a lot more about how ad tech works than I do, to help inform our work in DC trying to do policy in this area.
want him to go again? Really? I was kidding. Okay. He was kidding too. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Lewis. I work at Public Knowledge in Washington, D.C., where we're consumer and public interest advocates on behalf of free expression and open and secure online media. So we bring a passion for policymaking, smart policymaking. I really came to learn more about the advertising market, some of the challenges folks are facing, and see how we balance that against the concerns we have for privacy.
Hi, I'm Arvid, Senior Director of Product Development and Data Science at Math or Economics. We're a consultancy. We work with about 600 publishers, really focusing on media transformation, especially now with everyone shifting towards the membership model. How do you kind of balance both the advertising risk and reward on the consumer side and kind of finding that middle point? So I kind of bring my experience in kind of doing that for the last 10 years and really kind of the experience of on the ground working with publishers and trying to transform their business. What I hope to get today, folks have already said it. One is just like a tangible work plan, perhaps with milestones for the next year, next 2 years, that we can perhaps see how we can adapt our consultancy, our services to that plan.
Hello, I'm Rick Lerner from ClickShare Service Corp. I'm the CEO. We've been providing technology for newspapers and magazines to provide various revenue streams. And we've been looking at trying to provide personalization or privacy protected access across multiple sites, with including doing transactions where you can actually purchase things or record that you've been accessing things, but in a very privacy protected way for years. And we've been thrilled to hear that now people are really considering actually building that into their models now. And I'm very much looking to see how we can continue that transition. Thanks.
Hello, I'm not sure which way to face because I'm about in the middle of the room here. My name's Jeremy Malcolm. I'm from an organization that you haven't heard of before called Prostasia Foundation. So we don't do journalism or advertising or anything like that. We're a child protection organization, although there is some privacy, children's privacy involved in that. But I think the reason why I'm here is probably because I do have some expertise in multi-stakeholder processes related to internet governance, and that's one of the things that I want to get out of this as well, because this is a kind of going to be a template for a meeting that my organization is hoping to run in May. So really excited to be part of this and to be able to contribute. Thank you.
Try to go off to the side. I'm Aviv Ovadia. I'm the founder and executive director of the Thoughtful Technology Project. And the goal is to ensure that technology enables a future without ubiquitous destabilizing misinformation. And so what I bring here is sort of that frame of misinformation, and that relates deeply to fraud, to fake people, and also to the failure of the publishing incentives. And I hope to ensure that these sort of second-order issues are also included and thought about within this context of this discussion.
Hi, I'm Chris Hendricks. As I said before, I'm the president of the Local Media Consortium. I bring 25 years of digital publishing experience to the table across all the dimensions of the ecosystem. I echo what Fran had to say earlier, but I also would say that it is important for me to find help in bridging the gap between the trust we seek from our consumers and the lack of trust they should have in the way we treat their data and how that mutes what we want.
Hi, I'm Christina Gillum. I am just here to observe and listen. I work for Thatcher & Co. We are the communications firm that represents the Local Media Consortium.
Dave Gehring. I've got two jobs. One is CEO of a startup called Distributed Media Labs, which is a content distribution platform that on the one hand works with premium publishers like in California CalMatters or The Atlantic or Business Insider, and then on the other hand a growing number of local news publishers that are embedding that content for the sake of a revenue opportunity that doesn't leak users to third-party domains. So that's Distributed Media Lab. I'm also here because I, on the side, am a fellow at Mozilla focused on a project called Meridio in association with the World Economic Forum to see what we can do around this whole user data thing.
Hi, I'm Don Marty. I'm a participation strategist at Mozilla, work with open source communities. I'm here to figure out how we can work with publishers to develop out the server side of user data sharing technologies that's compatible with the future direction of the browser.
Hello, I'm Laura Bright. I'm an associate professor and department chair at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. And in terms of what I bring to the table, it's about a decade of consumer research specifically related to social media fatigue, privacy, and consumer trust. And what I want to take away is mainly getting ideas about what's most important on the industry side of things, because we don't get a whole lot of that in academia, and get more contacts, and just excited to learn about everything in the next couple days.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Pedigo. I'm head of government affairs for Digital Content Next, formerly the Online Publishers Association. We represent about 80 plus premium publishers. What I bring to the table is sort of a veteran of a number of these multi-stakeholder processes, from the W3C's Do Not Track working group, where 7 years invested there, to the DAA, we're members there, all the way to the NTIA's efforts at short form notices and that sort of thing. I'm also 25 years in DC, so pretty good understanding of how DC works and doesn't work, and sort of what's happening on the ground right now. What I'm looking to sort of get from here today is learning more about what's possible, right, with what we can accomplish with tech to meet consumer expectations on the web. Really resonated with me sort of this conversation about trying to help publishers monetize their content, but also sort of give users more power, more control over their experience. And then also, of course, anything that we sort of around sort of a set of data practices that are acceptable, and set of data practices where we need to provide more transparency choice for consumers, I think would be super helpful for informing the debate in DC.
Hi everyone, excuse me. I'm Mitch Drummond. I'm from Mother Jones Magazine, which is an independent nonprofit publication based out of San Francisco. What I bring here is a lot of like operational level challenges of both respecting user privacy and providing our users a really good experience, but also making sure that we're monetizing that content so we can continue to provide it year after year. So what I hope to provide to you guys is a really kind of operational ground level perspective of how some of these things are really difficult for publishers with a limited set of resources, both technologically and financially. So I'm hoping I can just speak to anyone who has questions about that, because I've been there since 2012. I started as an intern, so I've done all sorts of jobs. What I hope to get out of this is an understanding from where everyone's coming from the technological point of view about how to inform product development, and also from the advertising side, because I've spent time working with ad networks, but also doing work on the membership model, and how we can kind of blend these things together to both make sure that there's a sustainable ecosystem for quality news, but also like making sure that we can satisfy a variety of business needs.
Hey everyone, my name is Ashkan Soltani. As I said earlier, I'm a consultant. I helped with the California ballot initiative, which became the California privacy law. I was also the former chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission, and an investigator that looked into technologist at the agency that looked into a lot of the ad and online privacy cases for the agency in the early 2010s. I've also, kind of related to this forum, worked for the Journal, the Times, and the Post as a reporter. So I've worked in the journalism space as well, and also have done a privacy tech startup that was kind of a, if folks remember Ghostry, I did a mobile version of Ghostry that I later sold to another ad tech company. So I've done a bit of everything. What I hope to kind of take away from today is to better understand kind of the ecosystem. I'm still consulting and advising on some of the amendments to the California privacy law and some of the stuff floating around in DC. And I think it's important to understand the differences in the ad ecosystem and see if there are ways through both technology and policy to stratify and get support on, for example, some of the proposals and not others. Right now, industry is being lumped in as one whole group to a lot of the policymakers, so they consider publishers, ad tech, and advertisers as one homogeneous group, and I don't think that's helpful for a lot of the arguments. So to understand, for example, if ad tech is kind of different from this group, and whether there are members of this group that are interested in supporting certain parts of proposals that are floating around in California. So just a background, I wonder if it's worth saying a second about the, so the California privacy law, who's familiar with the law? Do folks know it pretty well? It's essentially, the ballot initiative was initially a right to know, right to say no. So it allowed consumers to know, to ask companies what information they're collecting about them, and then ask companies to stop the sale and sharing of that information to third parties. Nothing in the law prohibits first parties from advertising using that data, nor does it prohibit first parties from using third-party advertisers as ISPs, as service providers to serve advertising, but it does require that the third parties not use the data themselves or further sell or share the data. If you know the GDPR, it would be akin to the pre-consent mode in GDPR when publishers are allowed to use third-party advertisers. That's currently, the law also has a couple of additional features, a data breach provision and a right to delete. Consumers can ask the companies delete the information that they have posted themselves about them. And there's a kind of a lot of nuance around the verified user request process, much like GDPR. The law is scheduled to go into effect in summer of 2020, so summer of next year. The AG, California AG, is in the process of holding a series of workshops to hear from stakeholders and then providing rules and guidance around the law. There's areas where we left carve-outs for the AG to specify around certain changing technology standards and auditing standards. One of the challenges is much like any other policy debate, there's a number of proposals and amendments that are going to go in this year to primarily try to fix some of the kind of some errors in the law around language because it was implemented quickly. But in that process, a number of stakeholders are trying to essentially undermine and gut the law, leave huge carve-outs for advertising, allow special interest carve-outs for, say, loyalty groups or healthcare or whatever. And so a lot of what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to help the California Consumer Privacy Group do, is vet those proposals and weigh in on what still maintain the intent of the law. And we'd love, I think, to speak with anyone who's interested around what pieces they'd like to see improved and what they would support, with the hopes that there might be a set of good actors, publishers. You know, there's some actors in the space that I think are on the right side of this and want to maintain the relationship with their customer or their consumer, and they want to essentially operate in this framework. And there's a lot of other publishers that want to have, or sorry, other actors that want to have kind of free reign with regards to the consumer data. And so we'd like to try to align ourselves with some of the better players. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Andres Arrieta from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I manage some of the technology projects, mostly in consumer privacy, and I hope to bring the perspective of civil liberties and privacy for the users, not just the legal part, but mostly the technological part, how do we actually get there. And I would like to take from here maybe a solution to fund the internet while respecting users' privacy. That comes first.
Hi there, I'm Joe Harden from the Alliance for Audited Media. We're a 100-year-old company, a nonprofit. We're tripartite in the space where our board is made up of advertisers, agencies, and publishers. We have about 3,000 publications in North America. Some of the reason fraud doesn't happen in the offline world is because we're there to audit the circulation. And so we kind of set the rules with our board and our members, and then we produce audits against that. So as our clients are interested in the space and in digital and how they monetize that, I think we want to understand where that's going and how we can play a role to help in that effort. So that's what I'd like to get out of this.
Hello, I'm Augustin Fu. I've been in digital marketing for about 23 years, so I've kind of witnessed the entire arc of the evolution of the ad-supported internet. But again, since the Panopticlick initiative from 2010, I've been highly sensitized to the privacy needs of consumers as well, because those are often at odds with what the marketers need. So hopefully what we can get out of this is a practical roadmap, right? Because there's been a lot of great ideas, but how do we actually get something that will be adopted by all the different stakeholders, including the consumers, the marketers, and the publishers? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Johannes Munter. I'm a public policy manager with the News Media Alliance. And for those who don't know, News Media Alliance was formerly known as the Newspapers Association of America, and we represent about 2,000 news organizations here in the US and internationally. Personally, I'm a lawyer, mostly focused on copyright law, but also more and more on privacy issues. And I've also worked previously as a journalist and in politics. And I'm here to observe the process. We think it's really interesting, potentially really valuable. So I'm here to observe and learn more about where this is going and whether there's some way that NMA could potentially be involved, or what our position would be in this process.
Hello, I'm David Carroll. I'm an associate professor at Parsons here in New York, a recovering tech media entrepreneur. I've been in the industry for like 2 decades, like many of you. I am currently working on suing Cambridge Analytica in the United Kingdom. So, the idea that as a U.S. citizen, deeply appreciating the European model. And seeing enforcement happen. So just last week, they were criminally prosecuted and pleaded guilty to failing to uphold an enforcement order to fully disclose data. So it touches some of the issues that we're dealing with in the US this year. So for example, the idea of the California Act, the foundation of it as a right of access. Clearly, that is the key issue. And so the Cambridge Analytica story is so significant because it's a focal point to all the issues. It's the overlap between advertising and politics. It's the overlap between sort of international law and arbitrage across international law. It's the way that marketing ski vacations and skin creams is used to market ideologies and politics. So it's an incredible journey that I've been on. It's not over yet. There's another court event in March that will yield more information. But so I have a deep understanding of this topic and this issue from different perspectives, even though I'm not a policy person, not a lawyer, not an expert on any of this initially, but just an academic who had some curiosity and then found myself in this story. So the only person who knows more about Cambridge Analytica than me is probably Bob Mueller. I hope to get out of this sort of how this story is one that captures a lot of the issues, and how, sort of from the multi-stakeholder perspective, we can use the Cambridge Analytica story to inform the debate in 2019 going into 2020 when the California law comes into play and creates immense pressure on the rest of the industry and policymakers and so on. And basically, you know, I'll be asking simple like Cambridge Analytica litmus test, like, will your bill stop another Cambridge Analytica? In most cases, the answer is no.
Whew, not sure how to follow that up, but I guess I like this whole like moving out here. Hi, I'm Joseph Jerome. I work at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're a DC-based digital civil liberties advocacy organization. I work on our privacy and data project, so what I bring here is privacy and data, so CCPA, GDPR, whatever the federal privacy bills turn out to be. My organization also is increasingly interested in things like misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, as well as competition, so I'm interested to sort of see how all of these issues intersect there. In terms of what I'd like to take away, I guess I'd like to echo what Ashkan said. Increasingly, and I know this isn't true, but oftentimes industry is sort of portrayed as this monolith in opposition to privacy, data protection, data governance rules generally. And so I'm really just sort of hoping to listen and learn as to what sort of data and policies and interests publishers really want and need. So I'm hoping to learn there.
Hey, Justin Brookman from Consumer Reports. Michelle read my bio, but working on consumer protection and privacy law and policy issues for a long time now. And we usually lose, but it's been exciting that there's been a lot of like interest and momentum and new laws and new understanding that maybe we got some of these original decisions wrong when we structured the internet and allowed it to develop the way it did. So looking forward to working with y'all and brainstorming alternative models and ways to do this. Again, the alternative today is terrible, so we should be able to come up with something that's better, but looking forward to thinking through the clever and creative ways to do that.
You don't have to.
Amy Stepanovich, everyone.
Hi, I'm the latest one to enter this room, so apologies. Amy Stepanovich, I am the U.S. Policy Manager and Global Policy Council at Access Now, which is an international human rights organization. We were very vocal out of our Brussels office on the GDPR. We're already very vocal in DC about potential data protection legislation. We're bringing an international focus. Our audience is the user at risk, so a concentration on the impact of the internet on marginalized communities, not only in the United States, but around the world. That's what I hope to bring in, taking out, look how fast I pick up on what I need to say, taking out any partnerships, better understanding, ways to move forward, routes ahead with anybody, trying to figure out how to continue to engage on this issue leading up to 2020 and the implementation of the California bill. We're also announcing in the next month or so a new concentration on advocacy at the US state level, which is something my organization has never done before. So we'll be engaging in data protection laws that are being introduced in states other than California and seeing a path forward there. Kevin Bankston. Oh, well, never mind.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva Tucker. I'm here with over a decade experience in user experience design and digital marketing. I also have an interest in information accessibility and how that affects democracy. I've been doing some work with that since 2014, and I'm here in a support role for ITEGA.
We're going to take a break so you can stretch and clear your head and get something to eat if you like. I think we're going to just do 10 minutes to make up a little time, and then we're going to do a group discussion about the identity challenge, the ad fraud and identity challenge, in a word, distribution, right? We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to do an idea storming, which is where you just throw out ideas and you don't think about it, and we're going to explain that more. And then we're going to break out into small groups, and then we'll adjourn for the day. Yeah, what does that mean? They still have to do Brexit. Great, awesome. Yeah.